They love a dramatic release. They love the drama.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. The build up.
Literally. Hello, team, and welcome to Bureaucracy. I'm your host, Emily Gross. Very excited today because I have Sasha Buchert with me, who is the director of the Non-Binary and Transgender Rights Project at Lambda Legal. Sasha, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much, Emily. I really am grateful for you having me on the program.
Yeah. So before we start, I always like to ask my guests, why should we trust what you have to say? And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I've been doing this work for 10 plus years, and, anything I'm going to argue here will be the same arguments that I would make in a court of law. But that doesn't necessarily mean, that people should, trust me or believe me. I always encourage people to fact check any information that they're given over the internet, especially, and would welcome a further discussion with anybody that's interested in these issues.
Totally. I love when my guests are like, don't actually trust me, like fact check things. And I'm like, perfect.
Exactly.
And so what are we drinking?
I picked up a non-alcoholic Belgian white Blue Moon. I always liked Blue Moon. I still have to do a couple more hours of work, and I'm pretty useless after a drink or two. Sometimes it helps a little bit with the writing, but mostly not. I was troubled.
You like look at it the next day, and you're like, so this is gibberish.
Yeah. Exactly. I was a little troubled. I have to admit that I did a little research on them because I was like, I should find out a little bit more about them. And apparently, they're owned by Molson Coors, and they've had a little bit of a union problem, but that sounds like it was resolved last spring. So they're on the right track. So hopefully they'll stay that way so I can drink it.
Good. We love that. I have a Lagunitas, a little something, which I just like the name. Don't know the background of the company, but let's see if their beer tastes good.
Awesome.
They make a good beer.
I get the open.
But cheers. Very happy to have you. So as we get into this, there's been an insane amount of anti-trans legislation, and it has become one of the biggest talking points of the conservative movement. Would love for you just to provide some background on what you've been seeing over the years of work that you've been doing this, and why do you think there's been such this increase in negative dialogue surrounding the transgender movement and people who are trans?
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that question. Yeah, this is a really difficult moment for a lot of trans folks across the country. It comes, on the heels of, several years now of, really awful state legislation targeting trans folks. And I think I think we'll probably get into one or two topics, but I think it's important to take a step back too and just recognize that, this isn't just one thing. This is, it's about denying kids books that reflect who they are. It's about denying healthcare. It's about restricting access to restrooms. It's sports. It's healthcare. It's just the identity documents. It's just this whole, range of attacks that we've been seeing that have just escalated, every year since about 4 years ago. And I think that, if I had to, draw, some lines about why I personally think this is happening, I think it's pretty clear to me that the far right has lost the abortion issue. It's kind of, if the lines join as the growing support for abortion has increased, they've had to folks that oppose, folks that have been cheerleading on that issue and seeking to eliminate the autonomy of women to make their own choices about their body have pivoted, and they need to find another issue, instead of bringing constructive public policy issues to the forefront and trying to increase healthcare access. They've decided that the best way to stay in power is to go after a different vulnerable community, and that's trans folks. And it's clearly for a number of different reasons. I think that it's not just that they've needed to seize upon a culture war issue that they feel like is going to mobilize their base and do it at the expense of real people. By the way, I think that gets lost. And the terror I see every day of families is having to split up their homes, and mom has to move to the West Coast, with their kid, and the dad has to stay home and support the family. It's just so traumatic, not to mention the mental health impact, this is having on trans people, but trans youth in particular. I think another, causal, factor is, just the partisan gerrymandering. The way that districts have been created over the last few years is it creates, the situation where nobody needs to appeal to the middle. They just need to appeal to their most conservative voters, and they don't even make an effort to do that. All they want to do is to, stave off, someone who's going to have, even more, awful targeting ideas about trans folks. So, I think it's that. I think it's abortion. I think it's it's partisan gerrymandering. I think it's growing visibility. There's a saying that, first they, ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. And I think that's really true, in a lot of different circumstances, including ours. If you look back in our history, for, a long time, people just ignored trans people and just, sought to erase us. And then, up to about 2011, you can't really watch a sitcom without there being some kind of really awful trans joke. And in the last few years, it's just become the fight. And this is just, it's not unique to the trans experience. This is something we've unfortunately seen as a country over and over and over again. This is, the fight, and we'll continue to fight until our community doesn't have to look over its shoulder to live their lives free from discrimination.
Absolutely. So I did some research beforehand, and I read that there was like 670 bills introduced that targeted trans people and their rights to live, Can you walk us through some of those big pieces of legislation?
Yeah, I think, the thing that, the folks that really are going after trans folks in particular, are, folks that have really seized on the sports question, first of all. They've made this the centerpiece of and the closing message for the, federal campaign.
Common dialogue, a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
and then it's just accelerated and crazy and mushroomed.
Yeah, and you would think that there's, hundreds of thousands of trans people trying to participate in sports the way this discussion is framed, and but the reality is, and I challenge anybody to confront their state legislator when they start talking about these issues. I challenge them to name one trans athlete in their state. They can't even name a trans guy, much less a trans woman, which is what most of the trans panic seems to be about. And in fact, the governor of Utah, in issuing his veto statement, pointed this out and said, look, of the 50,000, 60,000 kids who are, trying to participate in the state, we've got exactly one transgender girl. And that's what this is about.
That's
and
obscene.
So, this all of this hype and anger and fear that is being mobilized is for some trans girl playing badminton somewhere. The question I think people should ask themselves is what's really going on here? What is really happening? Are they, these arguments that, they're supporting women's sports, are they, providing equal opportunities in all the different athletic possibilities in their schools? Are they creating equal weight rooms? Are they really supporting women's sports? Are there equal opportunities for, the sports that, women by and large enjoy participating in? I don't think so. and so I think that's just been, really scary to see the way that this has been really weaponized and just, so much fervor about this. And I get it. People are very protective, and, athletics is a very zero-sum situation in a lot of people's minds. And it's easy to pose trans people as a threat. But, statistically, trans people make up 1% of the 1.4% of the population, and half of that would be 0.7% for these, dangerous trans women. And, I'm sorry, but I know, like, I can count on one hand the number of trans girls I know that are seeking to participate in any sports. So that's with all of this rhetoric, millions and millions of dollars in ad campaigns, all of this anger just getting whipped up. And what's it about? 3 kids. if you ask these state legislators, they can never name anybody that they've talked to or even know about in their state.
It's so obscene. It's
So
like,
that's
do
one
something better
example.
with your time. Like, please. Like, come on. There
Yeah,
are so many
exactly.
other
There are so
problems.
many things just into, it's amazing. Yeah. And it creates a lot of problems, for, non-transgender girls too. We hear all the time these stories about, parents go to these matches and, all of this, fervor has been whipped up about, trans kids. And so they're just out there looking. And if somebody doesn't, fit their stereotype of what, a girl should look like, they're making public accusations and accusing them. Idaho has a piece of their, sports ban where, anybody can force any girl to undergo invasive gender testing. They have to go to their doctor and provide evidence if they're accused of being transgender.
That is fucking wild. Sorry. But like, that is
Yeah.
insane. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. And
that's
this is
so violating and so upsetting. Oh my
it's
God.
disgusting. It
It's
really is.
gross.
It really is. It's just, and these are just high school kids, I can understand, there being, a need for, some kind of standard at the, at the collegiate level. But we're talking about grade school. We're talking about kids rolling around and playing soccer, all of this, like, fear and anxiety about, trophies and, there's so many, benefits that kids get just from participating in sports. They learn how to, like, you know, have discipline and provide leadership, and they learn courage, and they get healthier. And so to deny these to the handful of trans kids that are out there is just reprehensible. So that's really been the strategy, is to soften people up by using an issue like this that they feel like will turn people against trans people, and they can just freely misgender trans kids in ways that are really dangerous and bad on their mental health. And then they move to healthcare bans and make arguments that, oh, this is the same exact care that's been provided for kids that are getting other conditions, but, for example, puberty blockers. But we feel like, even though that's been the same treatment, that's been, sometimes, the term gender affirming care is a little confusing, I think, because it kind of sounds like a little bit like it's a care that isn't commonly provided. It's something that's completely different, or unique, to trans kids. And that's just not true. This care for kids that are, suffering from puberty, from precocious puberty, who, undergo the same treatments, but, arguments are made, oh, we have to deny them care, because this is so dangerous, even though this has already been provided for many years for other conditions, or there's just attempts to, prevent schools from teaching anything or even identifying, LGBTQ issues at all. So kids can never see themselves reflected, when they go to the library, or hear about, themselves when they're in a classroom. So it's just really, really a dangerous time.
Yeah. I mean, for people who feel any confusion about this, it's not going to change. The amount of amount of children who identify as transgender is just going to make their lives more dangerous. Like, I feel like that's the thing that people aren't getting. I'm like, it's not going to change the numbers. It's not going to change the people. You're just making life 10 times worse for the people that do exist. It's crazy to me.
Yeah.
It's
That's
wild.
exactly right.
So let's talk a little bit about the mental health repercussions of this legislation, and in this increase in anti-trans rhetoric.
Yeah, it's just really been difficult to witness, because we talk to folks in the community all the time, and just like, again, we talk to families who are having to split up. We talk about whenever even when these bills don't pass, they're being introduced all around the country. We see spikes in, there's this service that's called the Trans Lifeline for folks who are, experiencing, mental health concerns, and it's a great resource for folks. But we know from hearing from them that whenever this legislation is introduced, that the numbers of calls, spike. And I don't know if the case, that's the case with the Trevor Project, which also does a lot of this work, but it wouldn't surprise me if it is. And it's just it's just heartbreaking too to see you know, going to these state legislatures and seeing, like, a 10-year-old girl, having to go and argue, in defense of her healthcare or in defense of her who she is. And you're exactly right. It's people are who they are. I mean, I had to bury who I am for 30 some years, and I lost half my life because of that. And that's the kind of thing that this will, that's the kind of harm that will be imposed on folks who are afraid to come out because it's so hostile. But it's not going to change who they are. They're still going to be transgender, and they're still going to be suffering. And all that said, too, I think though that it is important to uplift victories and to, even in this darkest hour, we're still seeing, amazing work, being done by people who love and support trans people across the country. We've seen a number of states issue, what are called shield laws, to protect, folks that are seeking care in those states that, are providers, from getting prosecuted by the folks that are, seeking to eliminate the care in any way they can, and just allies coming out and really supporting trans people. I can't tell you how many people have reached out to me in the last 3-4 years and have just said, hey, I'm thinking about you, just wanted to send a kind note. And, so it's just been really lovely, to know, how much, and I know that, it's going to take a long time. I think the part of the problem that we didn't discuss, with talking about, the why we are where we are is that, it's been a lot it's been easier for, folks to demonize trans folks because, we're just a smaller population. Again, we're 1.4% of the population. And so, the far right can caricature who we are, without, giving us a chance to respond. And it's, it's venues like this and other contexts where trans people are finally speaking and people are saying, oh, these are just human beings. They have dreams like I do. They have, they want families. They love dogs. They love ice cream. So I think that, the humanization piece of this is which is so important, is just, something that, that has been, weaponized again, to overuse a word. So yeah, but to answer your question, the mental health, impact, of these bills and when they are passed and people aren't able to access healthcare has just been, deeply distressing to witness.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to talk about the recent Supreme Court case and everyone's been talking about, which is United States versus Skrmetti from Tennessee. Could you walk us through that case a little bit and the implications of it?
Yeah, and in line with raising up victories too. I think one major victory with regard to this case is that we as difficult as this moment is, there are still firsts that are happening, and in the oral argument in the Skrmetti case, we had our first openly trans attorney arguing in front of the Supreme Court, Chase Strangio, who did an absolute stellar job, by the way. And we also have this year our first openly trans, member of Congress that has been elected. So
Sarah
those
McBride.
are gigantic firsts. Yeah, Sarah McBride. So, I sometimes it's hard, you ask a lawyer to come onto the program, and apologies, but we'll find the dark side of every silver cloud. So, stop and take a drink.
No, I mean, it's great. No, it's like we love the little victories. We love it. We love more representation. And, we love making bigots, come face to face with what they're being bigots about and being like, listen, we're here to stay. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. We're here, we're queer, and we're not going anywhere. So the argument, that the Supreme Court heard, a couple weeks ago here was involving a healthcare ban for minors that was issued in Tennessee. And, I think just, before jumping into what was discussed in the court, I just, one thing I want to say again is that, there's a lot of junk science that's put out into the world. It's just bunk, the word I use. It's just this, crap that, legislators throw out. They have exactly zero iotas of medical information or education. And suddenly they are just pontificating right and left on the dangers of this healthcare, absolutely no medical background at all. As opposed to, every major medical association in the country, doctors that have been in medical schools that have been providing this care for, decades now. And the Tennessee issued one of those bans based on that, those specious arguments. And the district court in that case, who was, appointee from from the first Trump administration, by the way, issued a really thoughtful ruling, and that was consistent with what we've seen with other district courts, even really restricted, even in conservative parts of the country, like Arkansas and Florida. The court issued this injunction, really powerful injunction, saying, "Look, I've heard your evidence, defendants, that and I've heard your arguments that this is dangerous care, and we need to ban it altogether." And they just don't. They don't cut it. They don't cut the water. They don't cut the whatever it is, the cheese. That's probably not right. It's non-alcoholic beers.
Are you sure there's not alcohol in this?
They don't cut the mustard, or is it mustard? I don't know. Anyway,
I have no. I think cut the cheese is farting, but I could be wrong.
Right. Sorry, listeners. Anyway, the district court said that's just, that's not going to fly here. That's just, it's bunk. And they issued an injunction saying, we're not going to let this law go into effect. And so it was a really powerful decision. Unfortunately, the Sixth Circuit, reversed that, and, with some really unfortunate reasoning that harkens back to some of the worst stereotyping about gender, in my opinion, that we've ever seen in this country. At one point there were laws, that said that, we can, restrict the amount of hours that women can work because there are, quote, biological differences, and that will justify, having unequal work opportunities. And, that was part of the reasoning in this case. And they were, Sixth Circuit basically was saying, we don't have to apply, a higher scrutiny, even though this is sex discrimination, and the language of the law itself is absolutely unbelievable. It's just it's a character. They wrote it in some ways. It was a gift in that they wrote it, it was so important to them to ban this healthcare for 1% of the population that they prioritized it as their top bill that they needed to move through the legislature. It was SB 1. And,
who cares about housing, healthcare, transportation, anything else? Who cares?
You would think, I think the Tennesseans have some higher priorities, that they probably would prefer their state legislature. But there's just like this awful language about it's important to the legislature that, youth, quote, appreciate their sex, and not to be disdainful of their sex at birth, and there's language in the bill that says that they want to prohibit the care for anyone if the purpose is to allow them to live as or identify as a sex that's different than their sex assigned at birth. Just absolute stereotyping and just clear sex discrimination. And so that's the argument we made, and the court said, no, we're not going to view this as sex discrimination. We're just going to consider this a medical regulation that applies to everyone, even though it clearly is sex discrimination. And so that was the argument, that the Supreme Court considered, in the oral argument. The Solicitor General, Prelogar, Miss Prelogar, was amazing. It's absolutely stunning, as was Chase, and it was just a really well done argument. It's always hard to read the tea leaves of a Supreme Court argument, but the questions did tend to gravitate, less toward, the legal question in the case, in my opinion, which was, with the appropriate level of scrutiny to apply, and more towards, a question of how they might, decide, whether this healthcare is appropriate to ban or not, which is a completely different question. And that's not really what they should have been discussing, in my opinion. So I fall somewhere in the middle. I'm not pessimistic. I'm not really optimistic, but, that was the argument. And we'll probably get a decision, in sometime in June, as they usually save the big decisions for the end. Like
they love a dramatic release. They love the drama.
Yes, exactly. The build up.
Literally. You remember,
this past, they bring in the boxes.
Literally, this past June, they released like all the biggest ones, like in the last 3 days. And the most dramatic. I always say about like legislative officials and, justices, whatever. I was like, they're basically just like wannabe Instagram influencers that weren't hot enough to be Instagram influencers. And they just need the attention and the drama. but that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, there does seem to be some non-essential drama here. So
Literally. Oh my
for
God,
sure.
it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So let's say, unfortunately, if the court decides to side with Tennessee, what impact would that have?
Yeah, again, this is like tea leaf reading, and there's a range of different ways this could go. The best case scenario is, they listen to us and understand. And I don't really understand how you could not see it this way. But if they they could send the case back to the Sixth Circuit or the district court and just ask them, hey, you just need to pressure test your findings, like state legislature, you've made these arguments, this care is so dangerous. You need to show your proof, in a more formal setting, and show your work. And you need to do that under the right appropriate standard, and that's all we were that so that's one scenario that would be ideal. We're not even asking them to issue some sweeping decision that this is should never be banned, and this should apply to all of the other bans. We're just asking them to return the case to the Sixth Circuit to apply the right level of scrutiny. So that would be the best case scenario for us, and that would be in line with literally decades of case law precedent, on this question. So it wouldn't be some, in fact, with regard to the litigation around sports bans, for example, they apply heightened scrutiny because it's clearly a form of sex-based discrimination. It doesn't mean we're going to win at the end of the day. We're just saying you can't just give this a rubber stamp and just say, this is a regulation, so medical regulation, so we're just going to, rubber stamp it. So that would be ideal, and then there's the, different gradations where, they could issue a decision that says that, for medical regulations, that this would, heightened scrutiny doesn't need to apply, and that it could just be rational basis, which would be a loss for us. And it would clearly open the door to bans on adult care in those states, which the states are already looking at. It's no secret. So that would be, pretty a tough a loss if that were to be the ruling that came down. It's so hard not to argue against that scenario because it's so irrational in my opinion. But and then I guess another third possibility would be it would just be the sweeping ruling that just says that equal protection, trans people never get heightened scrutiny under equal protection claims, and they're just and that would apply. And we bring that kind of claim in a lot of our other cases. When we're for example, going after state action that tries to prohibit people from updating identity documents or bathroom access or any of those other things. Equal protection is usually a claim that we bring, so it would have a knock-on effect on those other kinds of claims as well.
One thing that I think is really interesting that I feel like has knocked on a lot of media coverage is the fact that the recent NDAA, the National Defense Appropriations Act, is that it? Yes.
That's perfect.
Perfect. Okay. The recent, federal national defense bill includes a very anti-trans law in there if it were to be passed, which is made through the House and the Democratic Senate with only 14 Democratic senators opposing. And it now goes up to Biden to be signed. Would you mind sharing a little bit about what this potential anti-trans legislation says?
Yeah, it's a ban on TRICARE is the form of healthcare coverage that military families receive, and there was a rider that was placed into it, on the Senate side. This isn't new. This is something that folks on the far right have been seeking to try to do forever. But what's been happening because the House has been Republican and the Senate has been Democratically run for a while now is that they would, have, the House proposal, would be, and this isn't true of every Republican, but a lot of them do support it, are these kinds of bans on care, even for, the folks that are on the front line serving our military. They've been seeking to strip care from them for, the last few different legislative sessions. And what normally happens in this process is that The Senate doesn't include those kinds of poison pills. It just, has been, usually gets the House version, and then they reconcile, and then they strip out, the really awful provisions, and then, it gets sent to the president. But in this case, it was slipped in by, a committee on the Senate side, even though, Democrats should control that committee. It was moved forward, and so it became part of the final. There wasn't anything to reconcile because it was, from both sides, and so, it slipped into the bill and was passed, and it, again, it's just, to me, disgusting to see military families being used as political pawns, to win a culture war battle at the expense of, innocent trans kids who are just seeking to obtain healthcare that that other kids can receive. So it's just deeply harmful, and I think that's the road they're going to be looking down. For a lot of the fight to come is, going after, federal funding, which the NDAA is part of. It says it conditions treatment, federal funding on having this kind of exclusion for, targeting, one population, again, a very tiny population, but there's just so much animus about this issue, but that would be the result of this.
Disappointing. Very disappointing.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. Yeah, it's and this is a page out of the abortion, playbook, where, they've been seeking for many, many years to, prohibit, and have succeeded largely to prohibit all funding, most federal funding from going into providing any support for abortion related services. So
very upsetting.
It's not just healthcare. There's it's about flying, the pride flag, on any military installation. It's about, censoring, documents and conditioning healthcare in other contexts. There's like literally hundreds of these kinds of appropriation riders, and not just that have been introduced, not just in the NDAA, but across the board in appropriations.
It's just like weird obsessive behavior for literally 1.4% of the population. And it's like, and if you're and all these conservatives are, big talking point is, don't want the government interfering in my life. Well, what the fuck is this then?
Right. Exactly. I mean, this is, and it's something to note, in that it's not just, it's extremely intrusive. I mean, you hear about these, folks keeping track of, women's periods and like all of this really gross, the gender verification, steps that we were talking about earlier, it really is intrusive, and it certainly isn't, less government. It's definitely more government.
What is, as you're mentioning, only 1.4% of the population identifies as transgender, right? So most people have never interacted with someone who is transgender. As someone who's transgender yourself, is there anything you would like to comment or write the narrative or want to kind of share about your experience in case there's any misconceptions that people may have?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I touched on it, a little earlier, but I think getting, we need like a TV star or Will and Grace or somebody, to kind of break open the stereotypes that people have and to, humanize, but I guess, my recommendation would just be to maybe, seek, if you don't know somebody that's trans, maybe get to know somebody and just talk with them. We're all different. I can't really speak for the, the trans community, but I think that, one thing that's just disappointed me, in some ways is just that, we're just human beings, there's, nature is diverse, and we've always been here. We've always been a part of the fabric of humanity, and we're always going to be here. It's just, we're just made a little different, but that doesn't mean we don't have the same hopes and desires and love our families. Oh my God, I love my family so much. I love dogs. I love spring. So I guess just understanding, that there are these, we are real people, real human beings, and that these attacks and the ways in which these issues are framed is deeply unsettling, for folks in this moment, and just would encourage more less fear and anger and more love and more support.
Yeah, absolutely. I always try to remind people, different is not bad. I was like, there is no negative connotation, like it's something to be celebrated, and it's cool and it's delightful, and it makes me happy to see people be their authentic selves. And I think everyone should get the opportunity to do so.
Yeah.
So obviously Trump was reelected, which is not great for the trans rights movement and for transgender people and LGBTQ people in general. What is one thing people should keep a lookout for over the next couple of years?
I think that, they've, broadcasted the playbook a number of times, in the last month or two, about, where they're seeking to go, in the first, at least few months of the administration. So I think we can expect, attacks in, a few different areas. I think they'll certainly, impose some kind of ban on open trans military service, even though, folks have been serving openly with, distinction and honor for, over 10 years and have been able to meet the same exacting standards of any other service member and do it with grace and humility. So I just, it's deeply disturbing to see. I think there'll be attacks on access to care, healthcare, in particular efforts to strip federal funding from healthcare providers that provide, care to transgender people. I think we'll see, an attempt to redefine sex as the incoming administration refers to it, which will probably mean, limiting people's ability to update identity documents and, to, impose, discrimination and on a number of different fronts, including, with the Department of Education and condition federal funding, on just forcing school districts to discriminate, and, we've seen this before. I've been at Lambda Legal since 2017 and we, by and large, beat the Trump administration on, almost all of the cases we filed. So, we're standing by and ready to fight again. And, it's just, it's heartbreaking that this has to happen. And I really, in the bottom of my heart, do not believe that anybody elected, this administration, with a mandate for hate. I think there are a lot of other complex social factors, but, I don't think anybody elected, them thinking that this is what they wanted in their life. So I don't believe that. There's probably a small minority of people that believe that, but I think by and large, most Americans support LGBTQ folks and trans people in particular. So we stand by and we're, again, this is just a fight. And I'm confident that, we'll, continue to, win in the courts. And that I think people see this. I think people are increasingly seeing this for what it is. And it's a difficult moment for sure, but, we're a resilient community and just appreciate the love and compassion that so many people have extended to us over the last few years and now.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we wrap up, any last comments you would like to say?
No, just want to, again, thank you for having me on the program, and thank you for everybody that's listening and for all of the allyship and wonderful folks out there, seeking to make a difference in whatever way you can. So I just appreciate it. I appreciate the concept of your podcast.
Thank you.
As a lover of beer.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I'm your host, Emily Gross. We'll be back next week with another episode of Bureaucracy.